Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Jacob Stan, and I love reading and telling stories to kids of all ages. So, in the last part, we saw Jake's nightmare getting worse. The shadow figure spoke to him, told him he shouldn't be there, and Jake barely made it out of his apartment. But the story isn't over yet. In fact, it's about to take a turn for the worse. Let's jump right into the final part of this terrifying tale. Alright, so after that night, Jake knew he couldn't keep avoiding what was happening. But at the same time, he couldn't bring himself to go back into the apartment. He spent the night at a cheap motel down the street, barely sleeping, constantly looking over his shoulder. The next morning, Jake decided to take action. He started researching the history of the building, hoping to find some kind of explanation for what was going on. What he found was unsettling. The building was over 100 years old and had changed hands more times than Jake could count. There were scattered reports of tenants hearing strange noises, seeing shadows, and even claiming that objects in their apartments had been moved on their own. One tenant had written about feeling like they were being watched constantly, and another had abruptly vanished, leaving behind all their belongings. The deeper Jake dug, the more disturbed he became. But one detail stood out above the rest. Years ago, there had been a fire in the building, and one of the tenants, a recluse no one knew much about, had died in Jake's apartment. Some of the reports claimed the man had been involved in strange rituals, though no one could prove it. Armed with this knowledge, Jake decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He called a friend, explained what had been happening, and asked them to come with him to the apartment to grab his stuff. That evening, Jake and his friend, let's call him Chris, arrived at the building. Jake was already on edge, and Chris, while skeptical, promised to have his back. As soon as they stepped into the apartment, Jake felt it. That same heavy, oppressive feeling, like the air was thicker inside. Chris laughed nervously and tried to brush it off, saying the place just needed better ventilation. But Jake could tell Chris was starting to feel it too. They quickly started packing up Jake's things, trying to ignore the strange creaks and faint whispers that seemed to follow them from room to room. But then, as they were about to leave, the whispers grew louder. Chris froze, staring down the hallway toward Jake's bedroom. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Jake nodded, his stomach dropping. The whispers weren't just random murmurs anymore. They were forming words, clearer, louder. "You can't leave," they said. Jake grabbed Chris's arm and pulled him toward the door, but before they could reach it, the lights flickered and went out. They were plunged into darkness, with only the faint glow of Jake's phone lighting the way. And then the shadow appeared. It was standing in the middle of the living room, taller and darker than before, its spindly arms stretching toward the ceiling. Jake and Chris stood frozen as the thing began to move, its head tilting unnaturally to one side. "You shouldn't have come back," it said. In that same gravelly, inhuman voice, Chris snapped out of his shock and bolted for the door, yanking it open. "Jake, let's go," he yelled. But Jake couldn't move. The shadow had taken another step forward, and Jake could feel its cold, suffocating presence pressing down on him. "You don't belong here," it hissed, summoning every ounce of courage he had left, Jake ran. He didn't look back, didn't stop until he and Chris were outside gasping for air. Jake never went back to the apartment after that. He didn't even bother trying to get his deposit back. He just walked away. But the thing is, it didn't end there. Jake started noticing strange things, even after he moved to a new place. Doors would creak open on their own. He'd hear faint whispers at night. And every now and then, out of the corner of his eye, he'd see a shadow, tall and thin, just watching him. He doesn't know if it followed him or if part of it stayed with him after he left. But one thing's for sure. He'll never forget the night he saw it for the first time. And he's still waiting, wondering if it's going to show itself again. Alright guys, that's the end of Jake's story. Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Do you think the shadow actually followed him? Or do you think it's all in his head? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss more creepy content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.